Hello, hello, and welcome to Why We Like It, the show where we talk about any story from any medium we want and why we think it's awesome. I cannot tell you how hard it was for me to get through that introduction.
It was really hard.
This is literally like attempt number 8, because the fact of the matter is, Tristan and I are buddies, and we normally have conversations via Skype as friends, and we're trying to do a show, and as it turns out, we're not suited for that, so we stumbled past it, and I figure it's time to let you introduce yourself, Tristan, so that I can be relieved from the responsibility of talking.
It's just too hard. Okay, I'm Tristan. I'm Sean's friend. That's primarily what I'm known for. It is a good portion of my identity at this point. Let's not mince words. When I'm not being Sean's friend, I like to write. I'm a software engineer. I do technical writing and testing. Play the piano, play games, and just really love stories. And so we're like, hey, let's do a show about stories. It was a good idea.
Reasonable. It seems like a good build order. I'm Sean. I'm, I guess, more commonly known as Day 9 for StarCraft things, and I guess being one-dimensional, I'm wearing a Protoss shirt today. But,
Representing.
Right? Represent. Fight the imbalance. Yeah, other than, you know, my what I do, which is gaming commentary and that sort of thing, I, too, have always been interested in stories. More so on the comic book side of things, especially just the improvisational and live storytelling I'm really into. So, Tristan and I decided to do this show where basically we talk about what we think is awesome. We don't try to get too intellectual. Our main goal is to just talk about the awesome, and we figured why not do Game of Thrones, because 100% of people have seen it at this point.
Yes, and it does not get much more awesome than Game of Thrones. Let's just be honest here.
So we're going to be alternating over the weeks, picking... Well, it's kind of like one of us picks a story or some series we likes, and we make the other person consume it. Tristan, you have read Game of Thrones, you've watched the TV show, so I'll let you do the introduction for today's episode.
So, you know, when you're starting a show, you always want to start with something a little small and ease you into it. And that's what's nice about Game of Thrones, is how small and simple it is. Merely a story about a man and a lot of men and some women. And then he tosses in wolves, and there's like 5 countries and 4 houses and this big-ass wall. And there's like zombies and magic and fire and dragons. And pretty much everything that you can imagine actually happens in Game of Thrones. I thought that was an infinite set, but it's actually finite, and George R. R. Martin stuffed it all into his books. It's not even done yet, so I'm really pretty interested to see where it goes after that. But yeah, Game of Thrones, slightly more seriously, Game of Thrones is probably one of the most... actually, I think it's probably basically the most popular fantasy series of the last 10 years. It's redefined the genre in a number of ways. It's kind of taken over as king from series like Wheel of Time or Terry Goodkind Sword of Truth, as kind of the monumental work of the last decade or 2 decades, actually. Pretty much any fantasy author, any fantasy writer, anyone who does stories has to be aware of Game of Thrones, because it's just that amazing. And what's really cool about it is that he's took something that was an amazing book and was really complicated, and HBO's turned it into an amazing series. So we're actually going to be able to talk about both here. We're going to talk about how it works in the medium of printed word and how it works on the TV camera.
Well, I guess the first thing that always blows my mind is the fact that you can actually keep track of all the characters. I mean, it's sort of funny.
Sort of.
Well, yeah.
don't make me recite them.
Well, it's kind of funny how difficult it is to build a story around one person, or around one story or one story arc. And I know you've even...
Yes, I have some experience with this difficulty.
Many struggles of trying to make a story work. And it's just
like,
remarkable.
I have one character and one conflict, and I can't figure out how to resolve it. And Martin's like, I'll just have 100 characters and 500 conflicts.
But, so, I haven't read... I mean, I've started book number 1. I originally picked it up because of the series. I mean, what in your eyes makes it work from a book perspective to be able to follow that many different viewpoints?
Man, it's really difficult, but Martin does some really nice things that make this manageable. The first thing he does is actually, it's kind of a technical technique, but it's really important. Every chapter has a header with the character's name who narrates that chapter. So chapter 1 is, I believe, Eddard, so Ned Stark. Actually, it might be Bran. I don't remember.
Oh, it was Bran. I think so. I mean,
I think it's Bran.
I fortunately just read this like 3 days ago, and I'm like, I think it's Bran. Like,
Damn it. My incredible knowledge has already been defeated. But that's really, really crucial, because if you just called them chapter one, or he had a title for each chapter, that's already sort of more information the reader has to process and go, okay, well, this is Bran's chapter. Oh, okay, this is Ned's chapter. Okay, this is Sansa's chapter. So that's kind of like a procedural thing he does, but I actually think it's critical to making it work, because it allows the reader to sort of quickly adjust into the headspace of each character. The other thing he does is he builds up the number of characters. He doesn't just say, okay, first 16 chapters, 16 different viewpoints, deal with this. You start off with just a few viewpoints. I believe the first book does end up hitting, I want to say 7. I can't remember. It's either 7 or 9 total viewpoints. But you start off with just Bran, Ned, for the stuff that's happening in Westeros. And then he also brings Daenerys in pretty early. And that's, of course, happening on a totally different continent. And he also sort of spreads outwards. So it's like, okay, you get introduced to Tyrion a little bit inward, and then Tyrion gets his starts getting his chapters.
Yeah, I remember we were talking about this earlier, that like everyone actually starts out in Winterfell and talks to each other, so that way you as the reader, when they spread apart, not only is it sort of easier to follow them, but also you get a clear sense of their interrelationship. Other than Daenerys, ignore her, to hell with Daenerys. But like the fact that Tyrion goes up north to the Wall, and it's, half of the Stark family goes south. You just get that nice, clear tie-in of the stakes, because I think it would be nearly impossible. Like okay, so I will state right off the bat that for me, almost, I'd probably say 95% of what I do is not like fictional types of like the talking I do is mostly like educational, right? Like we're gonna do like a functional explanation of why this thing works, or persuasive, or in that regard. So, I mean, I delight so much in that functionally, just having them all start out in the same point solves that issue of why do I care about the relationship between these two people? Because it's kind of funny, if it just began with there being some sort of drama with, like Sansa down south, and up north, the Starks caught wind of that, I wouldn't actually feel like there was that much connection. Or I wouldn't feel the tension in the same way as when you get to actually see, like with Catelyn, her children like wander away from her. Yep. And you just get that sense of her going like, just that little tiny scene creates that nice connection.
Yeah, it's really, the show gets anchored in a couple the story gets anchored in a couple places. The very first scene of the book, and actually it's the very first scene of the TV show, takes place north of the Wall. It's like a mini prologue, and it shows just these Rangers getting run down by the others, or the White Walkers.
Tristan,
there's a difference in terminology here.
Forgive me, Tristan. I have to interrupt you. If you haven't watched season 1 or read book 1, you're going to get spoiled. Surprise.
We're going to spoil the hell out of you.
Yeah, I guess that's an important thing to note 15 minutes in. But go ahead.
We haven't actually spoiled really anything yet, but we will be spoiling. Let's just be clear
Ned Stark
about that.
dies. Go ahead and continue with...
What? Oh my god. I'd forgotten again.
Oh yeah, like...
Now I have to relive it.
Like, anyway, is Ned Stark still alive? No, he was killed, wasn't he? No one will ever say that if they've read book 1. Wait, go ahead. We're north of the Wall, and I totally interrupted.
Yeah, so we're north of the Wall. Before Sean totally ruined my train of thought. Thanks, Sean. Anyway, so we're north of the Wall. And, we have these mysterious monsters, basically. These things, these undead wraiths, or whatever you want to call them. And so that sets the tone for the series right away, is you have this looming, ominous, dark threat, and it's coming, and it's coming from the north. And we don't get back to that for a long time. In fact, through all of book 1, we only see it in a very peripheral way. And book 1's really long, and season 1's really long. But somehow, by anchoring it at the start, and by mentioning it just enough, and by having it clearly sort of exist in the character's thoughts, this threat serves as like this underlying conflict for the entire story that actually works, and it's really cool to see that. because ambient conflicts can sort of fall down to the wayside pretty easily because you can just say, "Oh, Sean, the world's about to end," and then never mention it again, and people are like, "Okay, who cares?" But Martin's able to weave this in. So that's like anchor number one. Anchor number two is, and I believe this is the first chapter that's being narrated by Bran. It's the Stark family, and the Stark family is just sort of has just executed this prisoner, and they find these wolf cubs, these 5 wolf cubs, and Ned decides to spare their lives and gives there's 5 wolf cubs, or actually there's 6 wolf cubs and 6 children. One of the children is a stepson, is a bastard, and then the 5 natural born children, and each of them get a wolf cub. And we were talking about, you talked about a starting point where everyone's together in Winterfell. This is the starting point for the Stark family. The Stark family is essentially never together again after these first few scenes. And so this initial sort of point of like, oh, everyone's together, they're all getting their wolves, allows us to watch that sort of, those storylines spiderweb out, and they get very, very vastly apart, and let us keep track of them and let us care about that journey. Because as you pointed out, imagine if you started the book and everyone's already far apart and all these wars are happening and these fights are happening and everything's dramatic, and you're just going to be like, well, this is really confusing. Why do I care? And then you're going to shut the book down and go read something easier.
With one character and one conflict.
Yeah.
Well, it's almost funny how simple something like just giving each Stark child a dog is for just that like mental task of how do I keep track of all this information. I mean, there's a lot of descriptions of characters that are pretty similar. I mean, there's certainly a lot of ones that are different, like Daenerys with like the super bright golden hair of the Targaryens, right? There's not a lot of people that have that other than her brother, but like with a lot of people having gruff beards and stern looks and scars of sorts. The fact that you can go, oh, but that one has a dog. That person is a Stark. Yep. That it lays it in so easily. And Tristan, because I'm awesome, I have slides prepared. Watch this.
Oh, nice.
See, one of the things I love so much about the TV show is that visually it tags each of the locations. So, like, coming over here to Winterfell, yeah, it has a super desaturated look with a lot of greens. Green is essentially the only real color that you see in anything. And so I'm even going to go over here to inside Winterfell. I think I just Googled Winterfell and went, oh yeah, that scene. So this is at the very least nearby there. But you'll notice that the only real color you have is maybe some saturation of green, like on the grass at the right. But other than that, it's pretty desaturated. Grays, blacks, whites, and some green. There's not even really that much blue in there, to be honest.
Yeah,
and then
the blue's very dark.
Yeah. I mean, then you go over to the Flatlands, or Essos, or wherever Daenerys is, and suddenly there's not really any greens or blues. It's a lot of yellows, and it's like an exceptionally yellow hue to almost everything. And then you kind of have the shades of browns of the outfits of the Dothraki. And, I mean, even this scene, which you might not remember the specific look of the last slide we just saw, but this actually has a lot of yellows to it. Sure, there's greens, but you look at all the yellow of the sort of dead and dying grass, and then the browns, and even the yellow hues of the skin of all the Dothraki, and then you come back and look at this, and you can just instantly tell that these are 2 completely unique locations. And this continues where, with like The Wall, which is an even more extreme version, where it's literally black and white, and every now and again some color from fire. Where, like, here's Castle Black. This has a lot more black in it, contrasted with the last image that was almost all white. But still, it's just black and white, and you're not even seeing any of the green hues. Again, to contrast, you look back here and look at how much more rich this image is versus this one. And then we even look at Craster's Keep, where, things are a little darker. We have some horses, but most of the horses are shaded in shadow. This is clearly a wood building, a wood structure coming up. But it's still largely black and white. And I like that in terms of like the visual tagging, that I can actually keep track of everything, but also it allows for this nice mood for each of the different sequences. Like, I especially love North of the Wall is probably my favorite place ever. I love North of the Wall. And I know you want to talk about Resonance, and I'll already say that, like, just in terms of visual design, I love just how bitter and lonely and cold it looks. And just in terms of the color palette, the outfits, all of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's beautifully done. I mean, the images from that show are just so extraordinary. And it's just really cool because, you know, this idea of visual tagging has a direct analog, you know, in the story too, where it's like everything is tagged. Characters, places are both tagged by certain, you know, certain stylistic differences in the writing, certain adjectives that he's going to use to describe the Dothraki that he will never use to describe the Starks or the Lannisters. Physical attributes, as you just mentioned. Like the Lannisters are always blonde, right? Like that's actually a really, really important physical attribute that, like, it's more than just, oh, they're blonde. It actually becomes plot point too.
Yeah.
And one of the, you know, the only way they could ever manage this TV show was to sort of like realize that that's what Martin was doing and say, oh, we have to do this. Like, we are expecting our viewers to follow a lot of plot threads, and we're actually going to get a lot less exposition to sort of sort through them than the book gets. And they do it just with these just absolutely beautiful visualizations. And just on a side note, just looking at those stills, that looks so good.
Yeah!
That makes me so happy. Like, watching that show as a fantasy nerd who, you know, there's some really good fantasy movies, but there's not that many, frankly, compared to other genres. And a lot of them are really cheesy. And even if they're good written, they're visually not that great. To be able to see something that's just so well realized and exactly what you've always imagined since you were a kid, and just to see it like in full color and in full motion is just like this amazingly. It's this really emotional experience. I remember watching the first few episodes of that show and just being like, practically in tears, like just like how is this happening?
Which is the opposite feeling I had when I saw the Avatar: The Last Airbender movie, which also put me in tears for a different reason. You know,
it's got to do your research, Sean.
It is.
I was like, huh.
Yeah, I for another show.
That's too bad.
You know, it's funny because we've already spent a lot of time talking about like how impressive it is that there are huge numbers of things to keep track of, and yet in a very precise way visually in the TV shows, in a very precise way in terms of prose and tagging. In the book, you get a sense of, wow, I know what everything is, I know where these locations are and what's going on. But in terms of like the connection that you feel to some of the characters, it's really clever, I think, the way that Martin has so many different types of characters. Every single type of character you've ever heard of, or even any sort of story trope you've ever heard of, exists somewhere. You know, the mother who wants to care for her children, the young man who's trying to prove himself, the zombies. I'm trying to think of anything to say other than zombies, but I mean, you mentioned it.
Let's be honest here. The zombies are what matter to you.
They were what matter to me because I like zombies. It's really easy for me to write off anything, no matter how bad it is. I don't care if there's a zombie at some point. I'm like, well, this is quite good. And the fact that the series opened up with that immediately, I had this internal struggle where I wanted to spoil myself and find out what happens with the zombies and everything. And it's funny that, like you said, all through season 1, it was completely tangential. It was peripheral to everything that was going on. Every now and again, they dropped in a couple of stories about the White Walkers or the others. And there was that one scene where a wraith appeared and they had to kill it with fire. But it was enough to sort of keep me hooked. And I think you were talking about how your mom, who read Game of Thrones, really relates to Catelyn, but
I would say mother. My mom actually would not read Game of Thrones.
Who was it in your life that liked Catelyn?
I think that was more of a generic comment. Like, that is a character though that people like my mom could appreciate, right?
Oh.
Like, because I mean, it's the classic. It's this.
I see.
it's these archetypes and this idea that you're talking about. It's like this thing that really emotionally appeals to you. I'm going to interrupt myself just because it's absolutely adorable that my cat's tail is like just barely in frame.
Yeah, I know. I keep seeing that, and I was looking at it, and I was like, should I? Do I talk? It's here. Like I can actually point to it right in frame. There it is. Is that Sabin?
It is Sabin. Sabin has decided to star in the show as well with his tail, which is one of the finer attributes of him. There's no question. Wow. So
why we like it? Why we like it? Where we talk about cats and stories from any medium.
I mean, that's what gives our show an edge, Sean.
True.
Is that we have my cat's tail in the background. Do other people have my cat's tail? Absolutely not.
Dude, this show is going to be so upvoted by Reddit. Reddit's going to love this.
It's like they say some shit, but there's this cat's tail, and it's awesome.
It's compelling. So you were talking about archetypes.
Yeah. So we're talking about archetypes. I want to go. I'm going to go back to my resonance thing though, because this is what you're talking about dovetails into that so nicely. And actually, even as this will resonate with people who love cats' tails. Resonance is basically this concept that I was exposed to pretty recently, but it's like what emotionally gets you about a story. Like this is not necessarily something that's intellectual. This is the thing that like pulls on your heartstrings, burrows into your emotions, and just works. And once it's there, you're like hooked on the story. It doesn't matter if that story is terrible most of the time. It doesn't matter what the other elements are. If part of the story resonates with you, you're likely to sort of be into it. And one of the reasons I think that Game of Thrones is so popular and appeals to so many sort of groups of different people is because it finds ways to resonate with just a surprisingly high number of people. Now, for you, obviously, zombies. As you point out, it's like, there's a zombie. Martin could have like written about tea parties for the next 2,000 pages, and Sean would be like, well, I'm a little sick of hearing about how Earl Grey was produced in Westeros, given the seasonal differences between that and our world, but
as long as a pack of zombies just storm in and eat everyone at the tea party, I'm like, what a payoff, right? It would have been amazing.
Yeah, exactly. For me, there's a number of them, but the one that got me right away are basically the sort of the wolves. Now, the wolves aren't quite called magical, to be fair, but there's certainly something implied to be special about the wolves.
Yeah.
And I love the archetype of sort of a kid finding a magical pet. I love animal sidekicks in general, and once that happens, and of course this happens in a very early scene, I'm just like, I want to know what happens to the wolves. I want to know what the wolves' archetype storylines are like. And then I get really, really excited into it. And again, I could hate pretty much 90% of the rest of the story, and I'm going to keep reading it because I'm like, well, yeah, every other character is awful, but man, these wolves are pretty cool. I wonder what happens to the wolves. And again, so we're talking about, Catelyn and this idea of this mother trying to keep her family together, and it just keeps splintering and going apart. And she goes to, she starts off at the start of the book sort of seeming like, oh, maybe this prototypical medieval age wife who's just loyal to her husband. And then when, everything goes to hell, she's like, screw this, and she starts being a badass. She will do anything to save her family. She goes to some really, really extreme lengths, and there's some just amazing emotional scenes with Catelyn. I think she's an extraordinary character, and that's going to appeal to people who might not, they're like, I don't care about zombies, wolves are stupid, but they're like, this idea of this mother who will do anything to save her family, that's going to appeal to a lot of people. Tyrion is this character. He's a dwarf. He is physically handicapped. Physically handicapped people are not well represented in fantasy fiction. It's been pretty much a white, male, strong, stalwart hero genre. And I don't bring this up for any political correctness reason, but just like it's something, it's probably prevented the genre from branching out. The fantasy genre has not generally gained traction with a lot of the population. And this idea of someone who basically has a physical handicap being one of, if not arguably the most heroic character in the entire story. Once Ned dies, which we will talk more about, for me, Tyrion is basically the most good character left. And he's good in very interesting ways, because he's not like, he's not the sort of ultra-moral, loyal to a fault, honor type knight character. He's a very practical, cynical good. It's sort of like he's good in spite of himself and in spite of his family. So it's like he's rising above his station, he's rising above his family, he's rising above his physical limitations. Um, and he's an underdog, and we love underdogs, and we root for him. And that's another character. Again, you're gonna have people who love Tyrion and are again not into the rest of the stuff, and it doesn't matter. And though those are only like three of the things that resonate with people, there are dozens. We could spend 3 hours here just listening the various things that are going to resonate to different people. And if you are ever sitting there wondering why Game of Thrones is so just incredibly popular, that's why. It gets into the it gets to the heart of almost everyone on Earth.
Yeah,
not everyone, but pretty darn close.
Well, it's funny because I mean the character development almost feels like college sports to a certain extent, where I know for me, I very quickly got attached to zombies and to Jon Snow, and to Ned Stark. Like I was really feeling Ned Stark hardcore because you see how basically how much of a douche his brother is, the whole Baratheon family, and I just loved how nice he was, how he always chuckled and he was like nice to his kids, and I was like, oh, he's such a great dad, like all those really drew me in. And Robb Stark, I don't really care that much about. Arya, is it Arya or Aya?
It's Arya. I think it's just Arya.
Yeah, because I always confuse Arya with a friend's daughter that I think is named either Aya or Arya, and I can never remember which one I'm confusing. It's totally irrelevant. But Arya, I don't actually care that much about Arya. I'm fine watching scenes with Arya. I'm fine watching scenes with Robb. And in that sense, it's almost like when you get into your college sports team. And I'm from Kansas City. People love Kansas City Chiefs, but that's not college football. The KU Jayhawks. They love the Jayhawks. They love rooting for them. And then when another team comes up, like or actually I will take the Chiefs now that I think of it. Right, like in a week where the Chiefs is not playing, I know tons of people that would root against whatever team they felt like was the rival to the Kansas City Chiefs. Mm-hmm. And they would enjoy that process. I, for instance, am smitten whenever bad things happen to Sansa. That is great. and Cersei as well.
Sansa.
Yeah, no, gosh, I just want her to like not even horrible, like anything even mildly bad, like if she twists her ankle, I'm like, yes, right? If her food isn't quite very tasty, I feel reason to celebrate. Like I just don't connect with her, and she grates on me, and it makes it part of the whole experience. In the same way, again, it's sports. In the finals of Super Bowl, you might not care who wins, but you care the fact that your friend who you were betting against, his team lost, and you get to enjoy being like, look what happened. And it's this weirdly primal thing that, again, is so easy to screw up. And at the start of this episode, we were talking about how all the tagging techniques, visually separating everything out, making sure that you can follow it all, and then creating these really compelling archetypes that have this really subtle, but at the same time very, very simple interrelationship, creates this whole college football feel where you feel tied to your school and you're rooting against the other school. It's kind of funny how, despite all the complexity that's going on, all the little plots, each one is quite simple.
Yep.
At the end of the day.
That's key.
They're so simple. There's not that much crazy. I mean, probably with the exception of Littlefoot and the eunuch.
Sure.
Like, other than those...
Yeah, Varys definitely has some subtle stuff.
Yeah. But I mean, other than those, it's really simple. I mean, like, Sansa's been captured. And there you go, right? That's what's going on. And then they're convinced that Arya too is captured, and that's what goes on. And it just makes it so easy to follow. But again, not only are the characters compelling, but the drama that they're engaged in is really basic and just super engaging.
Yep. Yeah, it's really. I mean, I actually like your analogy with the sports teams, and the idea of not only characters to root for, but to root against. And I'm going to take this opportunity to bring up Joffrey.
Yeah. Is there
Joffrey,
anyone who likes Joffrey?
If there is, they should be in jail. I mean, I don't like laws, but if there's any laws that should be a law, that's one of them. It's like there'll be a new test. There's just police officers will just go around the street and say, "Sir, can you watch this clip?" It'll be like of Joffrey, and they'll say, "Sir, do you like this person?" Be, "Yeah, I think so." "Sir, get on your knees."
It's like the scene. It's like Knights of the Holy Grail, where you just say I like the wrong character, and you just get thrown off into the bridge, man.
Yep. I want to bring up Joffrey because, and we can talk about villains just in general, but it's amazing to me how much I hate Joffrey.
Right?
I read a lot. I read a lot of villains. And yeah, you usually hate the villain. That's pretty standard. You enjoy seeing him lose, and you're like, yeah, screw this guy. But then you finish the book, and you go off on your daily lives. I can, lay in bed and get angry thinking about Joffrey. I don't even mean, a little intellectual, yeah, he's pretty bad. I'm just like, fuck that guy. Why isn't he dead? I hate him so much. How can he do that? Having
fake arguments with Joffrey while you're on the walk to work. You show up red-faced for meetings. And okay, what's weird to me...
I have totally done that.
Okay, what's weird to me about Joffrey is especially in modern fiction, and even especially a lot of modern TV and comic books, villains, they paint in this tragic light where it's a sympathetic villain. You understand. Oh, you understand why they did what they did. One of my favorite TV shows, Flashpoint. It's always gray. The whole point of the show is how gray everything is. And then you get something like Sauron, who is literally pure evil.
Just by definition.
Yeah, he is definitively evil, or whatever big fireball was in the Fifth Element. It's just a big evil ball, right? That's all it is.
Yep.
And Joffrey, interestingly, is another character who's literally just evil. He's designed to have nothing redeemable about him, but there's something that's so grating about it. And again, I feel like it's that resonance thing, where I think everyone's been at school where there's some jerk, some bully, and your parents always say things like, "Oh, well, don't that. He always gets what's coming to him," and that's literally the only solace you get. And you're just like, "Mom, I think Mom, I don't feel better. He's gonna be an ass to me tomorrow too." But the idea of someone getting away with it feels horrible.
Yep, I actually think
nasty. And he's literally he's rich, his whole family, and he's just an asshole, and he's getting away with it. And you're like, no. No, and then because it's in this dark, gritty, evil world, you're not I hope he gets detention, right? It's I hope that he gets daggers in him slowly and bleeds out crying. You just wish these awful things upon him.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. I mean, I'm gonna quibble a little bit. I don't think I think one of the cool things about Joffrey is that he's not Sauron. He at least shouldn't be pure evil. He's just a kid. He's 14. He's just a stupid, spoiled kid. And that's what makes him so infuriating is you can just imagine a real stupid, spoiled kid, and you give him a bunch of power, and you give him, the ability to actually say, oh, execute this peasant, like what he does to Micah the butcher boy, which is one of those scenes that, so of course I read the books before I watched the show with you. We're watching the show, and we're watching that episode, and I'm just sitting there. My fists are balled, and I am angry and upset. And I can't, because I have to watch this happen, and I can do nothing about it, and I have to watch Joffrey, this stupid prat, this asshole, just take this perfectly nice kid, this perfectly innocent butcher boy, and have him killed, and also ruin the bond between Arya and her wolf, who I think is named Nymeria. I could be. Damn, I think it's Nymeria.
Post the correct answer in the comments.
You have this one of these few sort of happy little relationships. It's Arya is having a fun time with her friend and her wolf, and then Joffrey is the guy at beach in a sandcastle and he stomps on it. Except after he stomps on it, he takes out a knife and he kills the kid too.
What a jerk!
I know, but what's fascinating to me about the show is the actor playing Joffrey manages to carry all of that. You just look at him and you go, I hate this individual. Yeah. He just does this. He does it at a glance. He just looks at me. It's like, if you met him on the street, like, I almost feel bad for the guy because I'm pretty sure I would just, like, I would already hate him.
Yeah, he's typecast as jerk for life. He will never be in a sympathetic role. And, like, which, another thing I love about the TV show, I feel like every single actor they nail it. Like, real, like, look and cadence and strut. It's just all right.
It's really incredible.
I honestly think the actor for Joffrey is like one of the best actors I have seen.
I think he is one of the best. I think the actor who plays Varys, the eunuch,
oh, dude, that guy
is like literally perfect. Like, I don't know if I've ever seen, like, I like the casting, but like Varys is just perfect. It's like you could have just conjured him straight from the pages. His look, it's actually unreal to me. I get chills whenever I watch him. He's actually possibly my favorite character in the whole story, even though he's a secondary character. He lurks in the background, and he's just like, you know, he's got no direct physical power, right? Like, it's always made clear that pretty much any time anyone wanted to, they could just take out a sword and, like, skewer him, and there's nothing you can do about it. And yet he always manages to get the better of people.
He feels a lot like the way that the gods would interact with the mortals in story.
Yeah.
Where he, like, it's so weird, like you say, he could just be stabbed and died, and yet, you know, just like a god comes out of the shadow and is like, you poor mortal. Oh, don't worry, and then says something that just, you're just like, ugh, there's a catch here. It's like making a deal with the fairy. You're like, no, I don't,
I love his dialogue. I don't know how it's written so well. But it's just like, you listen to Varys and you're just like, oh my god. It's like Inception. There are plots within plots within plots. All he said was hello. It's like, how did that even happen? It's like, I really like the juxtaposition between Varys and Littlefinger, because it's like they're these both scheming, plotting guys.
Oh, did I call him Littlefoot earlier?
Oh yeah, I think you called him Littlefoot.
Isn't Littlefoot from what's that from? Is it Peter? Not Peter
Land
Pan.
Before Time?
That. Go on.
There could be dinosaurs here. We've got some more books to go.
Littlefoot.
That could be the big finale.
Yeah.
But like, so Littlefinger and Varys, it's like they're both schemers, they're both plotters, but like they make it seem like Littlefinger is just a total amateur, and he's like, you know, it's like Varys is sort of like, oh yes, Littlefinger, how cute, go off and do your things. And I really like that. It's something I didn't even realize until I probably watched the show and or read all the books maybe twice. But I love,
cool,
you know,
there's so much physical opulence around Littlefinger, you know, like and like the brothel and his interaction there, all the money he's constantly throwing around, and
he's very garish.
Yeah, and you see nothing at all out of Varys, like nothing. You just see him show up and talk about little birds and then disappear, and always seems to be getting the upper hand. And again, it just creates that whole godlike mystique about him.
It's cool because it's like, on paper, if I was like outlining the story, I might look at this and go, wait a second, Varys and Littlefinger are really fulfilling the same story point. They're both scheming characters who have plots. Why do I, you know, because one of the things you have to do when you're writing these things is like, you don't want characters that fulfill the same role.
Yeah.
That doesn't actually add anything. And they're so, you know, on paper they have these similarities. It's just, but the way they function and the way they act is just so differently, and it's just really cool. I like that a lot.
You know, one thing I want to move to, and it's gonna hurt, is the death.
Move to
is the death of Ned Stark, which you know, it's time for a story within a story. So
yes.
Tristan's actually the person who got me into reading books.
Victory.
Yeah, books. You know, it's funny because when you're told to read books in high school, or even before then, it's always it's like literature. It's not a book. It's like it's about ideas. Like Catcher in the Rye. I'm fine with as like a book and a story, but it's and the fact that you have to write a report at the end, right? And then you started me on the Dresden Files, which is kick ass, and then you've been telling me about Game of Thrones for a really long time and all these book series, and when the TV series was coming up, you're like, do we have to watch this thing together? And I was like, all right, sweet, sounds great. And I even remember when we were watching that episode. It's episode 9 in season 1, and almost always after every single episode, I'm like, hey, you want to play some 2v2s in StarCraft? Right? There's always like, I'm always like chipper and bumpy, or oh, it was sweet. And I was like dead silent at the end because I just that moment for me, it's weird because it feels like an actual betrayal. I'm trying to think of like the how you'd contrast it with someone who's breaking the genre norms, you know, like how it was considered breaking a genre when an evil character wound up being good at the end, or when someone took an interesting twist, you'd be like, oh, that's really breaking conventions. But this one actually didn't feel like, oh, you broke the convention by killing the guy, George R. R. Martin. Nice one. I didn't see that one coming. I was like, fuck you, George. Like, I wanted to be nasty at him on a first name basis. I was like, you can't do that to my story. It was that weird, that shock, and I could feel in my brain it's the same thing that I do in chick flicks, and I do watch them, all right? That's fine. Some of them are great. When I'm watching it, I'm like, how are they going to get together? The movie is over in like 10 minutes. And then something crazy happens, like something just stupid, like a car accident. She flies out the window and lands on a sofa that's being carried by the guy. And in Game of Thrones, I kept imagining these increasingly ridiculous sequences that would save Ned Stark. Like, you know, like Arya like throws a rock and then the sword falls and it like breaks his chains and he gets free and he like runs out and he like holds his arms up and just floats into the air with a rainbow behind him. Like anything to save Ned fucking Stark from death. And then instead, like, his head gets chopped off. And ordinarily, I like to freak out. I like to be like, oh my god, what the fuck? Like, that's my nature. But I was just like, no. And I know you... I want it to be your turn. Because I'm losing my ability to be articulate.
It's one of those few rare moments that I'm very happy. I experienced it, of course, in the book first. Where somehow the book hits a new emotional high. And it's not necessarily like... It's not about happy or sad. It's like... It's like being hit. Or actually hurt. And I remember, you know, I was reading the book, and again, I read a lot of fantasy, and the concept of the main heroic character being in danger and having all hope is lost is just part of the standard story arc. It's the all hope is lost moment. Everything has the all hope is lost moment. Batman has the all hope is lost moment, and then you go, it's okay. He'll just try to escape 3 times, and on the 3rd time, everything will be okay.
And on attempts 1 and 2, they hurt Batman worse and worse.
Right.
I mean,
so
like,
I'm just like, it's...
attempt number 1, he tries to escape and he gets indigestion. And they're like, well, he's going to be uncomfortable now. And attempt 2, you know, he gets locked in with his girlfriend. And you're like, oh, she's so fleeting. She thinks she's important to the story, but Batman never has a girlfriend. And then attempt 3, he gets out and is like, did it! And he breaks up with you. And you're like, what a victory!
Right. So it's the 3 attempts thing. So I'm sitting there, I'm reading this book. I'm like, okay, things are looking bad for Ned Stark. He's in prison. They want to execute him. Joffrey's king. You know, it's not so good, but that's okay. He'll escape, or Arya will save him, or something. One
thing I wanted to totally interrupt you, like a douche, and just note real fast, is that you're talking about like the classic all hope is lost moment, and the hero will prevail in the end. And every now and again there's the death of that character, but there's always the promise that happens at the very, very end for the win.
Yep.
It's the half-court shot at the buzzer before he died.
Yep. And yeah, and I think that's a good thing to know. because yes, we have seen important characters die in fantasy before, but as you point out, it's the end and it's a self-sacrifice and it's for the greater good, and it's clear that wonderful things will happen because of that. So now we go back to Ned Stark sitting in the Lannisters' prison. And I'm just saying that, okay, so I'm reading chapter after chapter. I'm like, come on, Ned. I love Ned. He's great. He's honorable. He's good. It's like this world of horrible people, and Ned is good, and he's the hero of the story. And I can't wait to read 7 books about Ned Stark taking over the kingdom and leading them from summer into winter in this wonderful rainbow-filled fest as they go defeat the zombies. I can't wait. I'm just, come on, Ned. You just got to get out of the prison. And he's still in the prison. I'm like, come on, Ned. He's still in the prison. And then they take him out of the prison, and they bring him to the headsman's block. And I'm like, okay, well done, Martin. That is clearly the, place to do a turning point here. Let that headsman's axe get a hair's breadth away from his neck. And then, as you point out, stuff happens. Arya comes in to save him. Maybe Illyrio Payne, which is the funniest name for an executioner ever, just has a change of heart and takes that axe and swipes off Joffrey's head. That would be an amazing scene. I might have to...
that's in a fanfic somewhere.
It's gotta be. Oh my god, I wish that happened.
What was the executioner's name?
It's like... it's Ilian Payne.
Ilian Payne?
Yeah. It's like this like grim specter of a man with no tongue whose like only goal is to inflict pain.
Why don't they
because it's his last name. I mean, if your last name is Pain, what are you gonna do with your life, right?
Just go all out and call him Dr. Hurt, right? Like,
okay, so Ned's at the headsman's block under Payne's axe. I'm just like, yes, Martin, you've brought me to the edge of despair, and I'm ready to be pulled out for an emotional payoff. And then the axe drops and Ned dies. And I felt, and I could literally, it's like this, something seeped out of my body. And as you said, it's like normally, like you like to freak out and go, no, it's like arg or whatever. No, it's just like I sat there and I'm looking at the book and I'm like holding it in my hands. And it's like my mind froze and I felt numb. And then I felt it like weirdly hollow. And it's just like, what? No. And then after a moment, I'm like, no. Very clever, but, clearly that was, it was just a cutaway just before he died. And then 5 chapters later, we're going to find out he escaped. And he's just holding attention. So I'm like, okay.
He wakes up in
I can't wait 5 chapters. So I take the book and I start flipping through it. I'm like, come on, where's Ned?
And I remember
he's dead.
I remember you telling me that, like, in forums, people flipped out.
Yeah.
Because I mean, I don't really read that many storytelling forums. But I remember you telling me just, my God, Sean, people are very mad today.
Yeah. It was interesting. I follow a number of forums where pretty much every forum I read, no matter what the topic, has a thread on Game of Thrones, by the way, which is really cool. Poker, StarCraft, MMOs, they all talk about Game of Thrones. It's really neat. And yeah, it's just like the people who hadn't read the book, they were mad. They hated Martin.
Yeah.
They hated HBO. You can't do that. That was their character. That was the headline. That was Sean Bean. Sean Bean headlined season 1. He was the guy. He was the one where you looked at and said, yeah, Game of Thrones starring Sean Bean. And that is a promise that Sean Bean is not going to die in episode 9 of season 1.
It's kind of weird from a meta perspective, because just from a regular storytelling perspective, you don't kill the main character like that. But even beyond that, Sean Bean probably costs a good chunk of money. And to get him, knowing that you're going to kill him, you just don't do that in television. You're like, okay, when you're going to get our cast of 6 core characters, and we need to keep them on payroll for as many seasons as possible, even if we don't know what we're doing. And, it's kind of funny, because all the characters in Game of Thrones are quite complex and quite unique in their position. I mean, Daenerys, her brother trying to marry her off when they have nothing. All she has is basically her lineage. and yet she's able to become strong and like seize this new role that she's been put in.
Yep.
Tyrion, the midget, who's, I mean, like the dwarf, the bastard, right? Like these offensive terms applied to these characters who have these amazing qualities about them. I mean, every single character has these really interesting complexities to them. And then you have Ned Stark, who's literally the most cliche, by-the-book, normal character. He's literally lifted straight out of your honorable knight, early, like, era, medieval times story of valiance. He's the sort of guy who would actually go slay the dragon to rescue the princess and would live happily ever after. And yet somehow you feel super tied to him.
Yep.
And it's such a cool twist. And I remember you mentioned this to me, and I'm going to say it to take credit, that you were talking about how you don't like zombie media that much because it just feels filled with despair. And there's no point because everyone always dies in the end. And certainly a lot of zombie media has that problem where a character gets killed off. Actually, okay, I'm going to step back for a moment. Death in any story can go poorly from a storytelling perspective very easily, super easily, because, I mean, especially in a lot of the zombie fiction I read, there'll be the zombie that pops out of nowhere, kills someone you really like, and you'll go, oh no, and you get the shock moment, and then that's it. The next issue of the comic, I guess it's clear what I'm talking about now. The next issue of the comic, you're like, oh, all right, well, they're gone.
Yep.
Okay. Then you just sort of move on, or, you know, the movie ends, and you're like, oh, that guy died, and that stunk. And I feel like you're falling short in a lot of circumstances when that happens, because you've just taken this character that has all these interesting story arcs that could have happened, and you're almost just trying to get a cheap shock, a cheap scare to kind of go, boo! Ooh, that's right, it's scary in this world. But you get something like my favorite zombie fiction's Walking Dead, the comic book, that I think does death really successfully, and kind of like Ned Stark in Game of Thrones does death really successfully, where it serves an actual functional plot element. Not only is it shocking and gives you that, oh my gosh, but then it does something to contribute to the next, I keep wanting to say the next issue, but to the next elements of the story.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about the tension of everything being wound up. I'm just going to throw it to you.
Yeah, it's within the sort of scope of the entire series, not just book one. Ned Stark's death is kind of the conclusion of the introduction. It's the thing that takes this tightly wound ball of story arcs and destroys them and sends them scattering. Ned Stark was a connection for a lot of he was a nexus point, really, for a lot of the story. It's like if you sort of diagram the story, Ned Stark would be this sort of point with tons and tons of things coming from it. And by removing him, you send it into unexpected, almost like this unexpected chaos. Of course, Martin is planning this. He knows where it's going, and that chaos is where he takes the series. And it's one of the things that sets the series apart from this, very sort of expected arc. It's like, okay, well, what happens if the super honorable, wonderful knight character basically fails horribly and dies, and the people who killed him are now in a position of power, and it's not clear what's going to be done about that. Like, it's one thing if Ned died, and then, like, within a chapter, someone swept in and, like, avenged his death and killed Joffrey and killed Cersei and took over the kingdom. Like, then you might say, okay, well, a little twist, but, sort of the expected result. No, it's basically like Joffrey won. Joffrey, the guy we hate, he won. Book's over. He won.
But it's just so amazingly functional. Because one thing I just am like, no, you can't do that, is when someone says that a death is a philosophical representation of something, and then there's no functional plot tie-in. I know a lot of, I think the most common philosophical kind of death is to have a character represent a viewpoint like, everyone should get along. We're going to do great, and it's going to be about teamwork. So you kill that character to represent that attitude cannot survive in this world. Again, this is a really common trope in zombie media. You kill that guy. You're like, nah, it's not a thing. We need to have crazy psycho people. People who really live in this world. And I'm like, okay, I get that, but again, I'm happy to have them like read that in a newspaper. Like, you don't have to kill off a character who's interesting, who has all this meat to it.
Yep.
Again, unless there's like this driving plot element. And it's just, I think one of the coolest moments is before, in that week leading up to the next episode, I remember just stopping and going, well, what? Oh my God, what's gonna happen? There's so many implications to that. I mean, it felt so much like a major real life trauma that ended up happening. You know, like two people who get an apartment together that they can barely afford, and then both of them get fired within a week of each other, and you're like, oh, I mean, that's bad, right? You know, you both know how bad it is, but you know that also something is going to be coming down the line. And when you get to the ridiculous epic warring that goes on in subsequently, again, not to do too much spoilers for season 2, actually to do none, because we want to be respectful to those who haven't done that. You still have this connection to all these characters from a time when things were peaceful, and you're not surprised that anyone's at war, but at the same time, you don't quite see the way out either. It just felt so necessary to happen. And that, to me, is why I think Ned Stark's death is one of the most well done. He's one of my favorite deaths ever. A top 10 deaths, easy.
Nice.
For that very functional reason.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary moment. It's just like really shows a deft hand in terms of plotting. The other risk with a character death is that people stop watching. I'm pretty sure there are people who stopped watching Game of Thrones when Ned Stark died. I know for a fact there are people who stopped reading when Ned Stark died. They took the book, they threw it across the room, it hit the wall. They said, "I hate you, George R.R. Martin." They possibly wrote a some kind of death threat on Reddit, and like, that's a real risk. Like, it's one of the reasons when you're sort of like a newbie writer. And you're like, "Hey guys, can I kill my main character in chapter 9?" And people are like, "Sure, if you want to lose all your readers."
Yeah, right.
Because most of the time, that's what's going to happen. This is like the exception, not the rule. And he pulled it off because there was a lot of other things to root for. He pulled it off because the story was designed to sort of grow as a result of it, not shrink.
That's such a good way to put it.
Yeah, I just thought of it. I like it.
10 for 10. Wow.
Yeah, it's an extraordinary moment. It's something I will remember for the rest of my life, that happening in the book. And whenever you get one of those moments in a book or a TV show or a story at all, where it's just like, I will always remember that. It's like, well, I graduated from high school and I got a cat and Ned Stark died. It's like, those are the things that happened that year. It's like I'm sure I'm spending some.
That's such a funny description. Yeah,
it's incredible. In one of these future episodes, one of the series that we're going to bring up, or at least that I'm going to make Tristan read so that we can discuss it, is the comic series Akira. Nice. Which
similarly has this sort of moment in there.
That was an incredible face, by the way.
Thank you. I've been working those.
Top 10 face right there.
Top 10 face, good. This is. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting how many stories I enjoy that don't have that sort of moment where you this face moment in them, the sort of holy crap sort of thing. But I don't actually have a witty or clever conclusion. But yeah, Game of Thrones did. Oh, bing. But
it's great stuff.
Since we've been going for about about an hour. I wanted to wrap up ish. Also because it's a lot easier to edit the footage if I get it within the right time frame. I wonder if you have any sort of concluding remarks or things that you wanted to bring up that I guess we didn't.
I mean, we didn't bring up like everything. So that's the definition of an infinite set, Sean. I think my sort of final thought is the extraordinary difficulty of what George R. R. Martin is doing. As someone who is now sort of studying the storytelling craft and trying to learn how to tell simple stories about like one character, and then sort of looking back at Martin and just sort of being in absolute awe, sort of like, imagine it's like you're a StarCraft player, it's like you just hit like Platinum League, and you're like, I'm starting to get the hang of this. And then you watch like Stefano play, and you're just like, what?
It's like, is that, you can do that?
Yeah, you can do that. That's exactly the type of comment. I didn't know you could do this. Like, George R. R. Martin, in terms of complexity and skill, in my opinion, of plot, is number one. He's actually in a separate tier. I'm not talking about, like, there are a lot of other layers to storytelling, so I'm not, saying, like, it's best overall, but just in terms of, like, pulling off a plot this complicated, I don't think anyone's near him. I probably would not have thought it was possible to do it as well as he's doing it. And, there are criticisms of later books about plot-related issues, and to me, it's like, it's not that those criticisms are unwarranted, but it's just like, everyone else is doing difficulty level 8, and he's at difficulty level 93.
Yeah.
And he's pulling it off. It's unreal. It's amazing. It's like, it's an experience, and I feel very privileged to be able to sort of watch this story evolve and learn from it and see him. And it's really cool just to watch it all come together.
Yeah, I mean, even for me, I'm largely a TV consumer, or I should say, a large TV consumer of this series. One thing that I'm always just really interested in is just structure of story as it relates to, like, the medium. Like, the fact that in TV show, it's like an hour, 45 minutes to an hour. Or a comic book, how you'll have 24 pages in an issue. And then a volume will be 5 or 6 issues. The fact that there's these... I mean, 24 pages is kind of an arbitrary amount of pages. But that's the way it works in that industry. The fact that there's this fixed number of pages, that when you're reading through, it's really cool to stop and think, oh, what did this contribute to this overall arc that's in this 5 to 6 issue trade paperback? And it's so... And just like in a chapter, you would also say, okay, what is like the whole point of this segment as it relates to the broad segment? Okay, this guy's going to go into a diner and have a conversation, and then the next chapter is going to be him getting in a car chase from the diner. So you have these little things planted next to each other. I was doing this when I had the book, where I would just grab a chapter and read through it that I'd read before, but just start going out of order. And it's absolutely incredible to think that this chapter has characters that are completely unrelated to the chapter before and after it, and yet I don't feel like I'm waiting. I feel like there is this continual through line of things happening. I mean, even the break from chapter 1 to chapter 2 has just enough continuity to it, again, where they're in the forest, encountering the others, and that one guy gets executed, and the only thing that the only hint that it's the same person is about his ears, the frostbite that has worn away his ears. He doesn't even say anything, at least that I remember. I
don't think he does it either. He might have said something. I don't remember though.
He said something that was so... he didn't go, I was... let me rephrase. He specifically didn't say, I was in the forest and I saw the White Walkers and the legend's gonna come true in a couple thousand pages of the White Walker. Nothing. It's just like, his ears are frostbitten. Let's go on and talk about dire wolves. Like, yep. The way that he's able to lay these chapters out with subtle but firm bridges between them is just freaky, man, that it works.
Yeah,
and especially in the television show. I mean, I have a short attention span. I like things very pulpy. I'm not ashamed of how pulpy I like my media. Explosions and witty one-liners. I'm like, yeah, again, like that. I'm not ashamed of that. And yet here, with all these different storylines going on in the television series, it has the same feel as the book, where they're laid out next to each other in such a way that in that 45-minute segment, or in that hour segment, you actually get that feel of something building to a climax, as opposed to the awkward thing where there's a climax at the start and then it was just sort of blah for the remainder. And it seems like the hardest thing imaginable, and I'm not even sure anyone could even pull it off again. It's just super on point.
Yeah. It's awesome. We like it.
It's good, and you know what? That perfect. That's why we like it. Yes. So I hope you enjoyed the show. Let us know what you think, because we're going to do more of them, because we like all sorts of things. So for now, I'm Sean Plott.
I'm Tristan Brand.
Bye.